Hello, everyone. My name is Preston Dennett, and welcome to another episode of UFOs and the Paranormal. I call this episode Be Careful What You Wish For, the Pat Brown Story. People have often asked me how come there are so few people of color who have encounters? And I kind of always shake my head. I'm like, what are you talking about? Of course, people of color have encounters. In fact, in all my books in which I feature close encounters, there's always been people of many different races: Asian, Latino, black, white, you name it. So I have to say, people of all races do have encounters. And this particular case involves Pat Brown, who is of African American ancestry. At the time, this was the mid 1980s, Pat worked as a telephone operator and lived in a condominium complex in a crowded suburb outside of Los Angeles. And she had no interest in the paranormal, no interest in UFOs, was kind of skeptical of them actually. She'd lived a normal life. A few years earlier, her friend Denise, that is a pseudonym, moved to Prescott, Arizona, and Denise kept asking Pat to come and visit. Denise particularly wanted Pat to come see what she called walk-ins. These are psychic channelers who claim to channel extraterrestrials. Pat had no interest in this, but Denise kept on asking, and so finally Pat relented and agreed to come visit her friend Denise in Prescott, and together they would go see these people who channel extraterrestrials. So in 1988, that's what Pat did. She drove down to Prescott and stayed in Denise's home. And it was around the same time that she saw the channelers. She's not sure if it was before or after, but she had a very strange experience. She woke up one evening in Denise's home and saw these glowing light beings come through the wall and into her bedroom. As Pat says, I was lying in bed and I had my back to the wall when I saw these two aliens off towards the back of my head. I saw them come through the wall and they came up to me. They were slender, iridescent, like a whitish color. I didn't try to move, I just lay there. They came over and they went to the top of my head, and it felt very good, so I allowed it. Following this, Pat didn't think much of the experience. It wasn't traumatic, wasn't scary, but she really wasn't quite sure what to make of it. But following this, they went to go see the walk-ins, and one of these guys was channeling, and Pat was talking to the alien through the channeler, and asked the channeler, the ET, do you have a ship? Do you have a craft? And the ET replied, yes. And Pat said, I want to go on your ship. And the ET replied, oh, really, you do? And Pat said, yes, I'm very curious to see what it would look like to be on your ship. And the channeler agreed. And that was really the extent of the conversation. And following this visit to the channeler, Pat returned to her home in Southern California. It was 3 days later, Pat had a very lucid dream that she was on board a UFO. She remembers being laid out on a table and this soothing yellow light shone down on her, and it was a very pleasant feeling, and she fell asleep. It was somewhat of a dreamlike experience, but at the same time, it felt very real, particularly because she could feel a sensation, a very soothing and comforting sensation coming from this yellow light. So she thought that perhaps this was more than a dream, but she couldn't be sure. Interestingly, around this time, she decided she's going to quit her job, which was kind of a stifling position and not her true passion. She quit her job as a telephone operator and instead became a healing massage therapist, and lived a normal life for at least a couple of years more. But this all changed on Christmas Eve, 1992. That evening, Pat was asleep in her bedroom in her condominium complex when she woke up to find her bed surrounded by gray-type ETs. She was fully conscious, and this terrified her. She was very scared. They shone a beam of light down on her, paralyzing her, pulled her up through the wall, and the next thing she knows, she's on a craft. She's laying down on this table. It's got a kind of bronze color to it. There are weird panels all around her, shelves with weird instruments on them, and there's two grays, one on either side of her. There's a female gray on one side and what she perceives to be a male gray on the other side. The female gray is holding Pat down, holding her, has a hand on her head and on her chest, and is repeating over and over again, don't be afraid. I'm not going to hurt you. I'm not going to hurt you. She kept repeating it over and over again. You're fine. I'm not going to hurt you. But Pat was in a complete panic. As Pat says, I was fighting her like crazy. I put my finger in her mouth, the little thing that was her mouth, and I was trying to rip it out of her face. I was just going crazy. And at that point, the male gray on the other side said, boy, she's different tonight. And that kind of freaked Pat out, like different tonight. Had she been on board before? So she was really freaking out, and that's all she really remembers. She does remember that the atmosphere, the air on the ship was very strange, not quite like Earth normal. It was very cool, she says, very thin and almost silky in texture. So that was strange. But following this experience, she woke up back in her bedroom, immediately jumped up, grabbed the phone, and called her friend Denise and said, you will never guess where I have just been. Pat is absolutely certain this wasn't a dream. She was awake the whole time. And this is how her experiences really began in earnest. And following this one visitation, the ETs came again and again, over and over, for the next 30 days. They would come 3 days in a row, then not come for 4 or 5 days, and then come another 3 days in a row. And it was always the same. Pat would wake up to find her bed surrounded by these grays, and they would say, I'm not going to hurt you. We're not going to hurt you. We're just here to talk to you and to help you. But it caused Pat a lot of fear. They would always shine this beam of light down on her, paralyze her, and she'd float up through the wall and pass out and wake up some hours later back in her bedroom. So yeah, this was not a good experience for her. She didn't like it at all, and just kept going on for at least a month. And that wasn't the only strange thing that happened. Another weird thing that happened was she saw this apparition. As Pat says, it was just this big green thing. It didn't have any definite form, just this big green blob. It was solid, kind of like a dirty chartreuse green. It was very large. She saw it first in her den and another time in her living room. She has no idea what it was, but it was definitely very strange. Another strange thing that happened was one day she came home from work to find that the interior of her condo stank real bad, like dirty garbage, dirty rotting garbage. As Pat says, it was an awful, awful smell, but I perceived that they had been there, that was their odor. I have heard this described from other people who described a sort of sulfur-like odor. So perhaps Pat's intuition was correct. At any rate, after 30 days had passed, Pat was at the end of her rope. She couldn't take this anymore. These grays just kept coming and coming, and one evening she kind of knew they were going to be coming. It had been a few days. So she was crying, and she said out loud, thinking to them, this is far too big for me to handle. At that point, something very interesting happened. She heard a voice telepathically in her head saying, "Here is a ball of golden light for you. This is for your healing. As long as you need it, it's going to be here for you to use. You're on the yellow ray of healing now. When you're ready for the purple ray, we'll be back." So she saw this ball of yellow light, and following this experience, could see it in her mind's eye, and it stayed with her. And for the next 4 days or so, Pat just remained at home and did a lot of nurturing activities and worked with this ball of light, this really soothing yellow energy, which she said felt very, very healing, and it reduced her fear to a huge degree. And this is when her encounters made a dramatic shift from being very scary to becoming extremely spiritual. Pat continued, the Greys stopped coming, but Pat had many dreams of being on board the ship. And often when she was on the ship, it was very colorful. She would see these purple beams of light and red, and it was just a very colorful and beautiful experience. And she would become immersed in these purple beams of light. And again, she wondered if these were just dreams, even though she kind of knew they weren't because they were different from any dreams she's ever had. She was on board a UFO in these dreams. They were very, very vivid and just different from normal dreams. But she was still had a little bit of doubt about it. And so one evening, she decided to make an announcement and sort of speak out to the Greys or to the ETs, as she says, and I'm quoting, she says, "If I go to the ships at night, I'm going to go right now because I feel like going now." And the next thing I know, I was on a ship. This being came over to me, and it was like I knew him. He was a white man with blonde hair. The man approached her and said, "Do you want to go to your quarters?" And Pat was, "My quarters? Wow. Yeah, please." And as Pat says, they took me to this room, my quarters. It was real small. There was nothing personal there. The shelves were empty. One of the things that was really strange was the texture of the air on the ships. It's like silk. It's cool and thin. It's just a really pleasant sensation. After showing her her quarters, this man took her to another room where there was an examination table, very much like the first one she had laid out on sometime earlier. It was a bronze table. She lay down on this table, and the man began to teach her about her aura. As Pat says, they were teaching me how to go in between dimensions. I remember things that were happening to my aura. I remember telling me that there was something I had to do with my aura. During this teaching session, there was a shift. Pat suddenly woke up back in her bed, and she shouted out, "Oh my God, I want to go back to the ships. I want to go back onto the ship." And she heard a voice in her head. It was the same one who spoke to her earlier, the man on board the ship. And he said, "Wait just a minute. We're working with you." And moments later, Pat found herself back on the ship. Only this time, she was shocked to find that she was not in human form. While she still felt like a normal person, she still felt like Pat, she was actually this mass of swirling, colorful energy. And this man, this human-looking male, asked her, "Would you like to go meet the master?" And Pat said yes. And the man said, "Okay," and led her to another room. And as Pat says, in this room, she saw another person. As she says, there was this white man with yellow hair sitting on a throne. it wasn't the same man I had seen in my quarters. Pat asked the man, "Why do you look like that?" And the man replied, "Because this is the way you want me to look." At that point, he changed from human form into this swirling sort of uh, energy, this ball of light and swirling energy, much like the same form Pat was in. And Pat was confused about all this, and the man said, "This is your soul. This is the part of you that goes through all the lifetimes." At that point, the man showed her how the energies in her body were segmented and began to show her the masculine and feminine part of her energies. And in fact, he separated the masculine and feminine energies apart so that she could get a better sense of what they were and how they were integrated together. And he also took her through various vibrational levels or dimensions and was teaching her again how to sort of travel interdimensionally and astrally, out of body experiences, this sort of thing. So it was a very positive experience for her. And at one point, this man, quote, the master, took Pat from this room and outside of the ship, still in their energetic form, and showed her our planet, Earth, from way high above, and showed her that there was an outer band of energies, which was very peaceful. And in this outer band of energies, she felt an immense feeling of peace and oneness. And then he took her closer and closer to the earth, and she saw that there was this big, swirling black band of energy surrounding the earth. He took her into it, and she was horrified. It was very negative energy and was just vibrating at a very low frequency of fear and anger and greed and all these negative emotions. As Pat says, the vibration was very thick, and it's not a good feeling. Fear is what's predominant. It's like all you can feel. When you come through it, all you feel is fear. At that point, the man took her back onto the UFO craft, and they went up to the control room. And this is where Pat got another real shock. There were other people there. Again, they looked human. And in fact, she recognized them. She felt like she knew them and that she was not only knew them, but that she was one of them. The whole front of the control room was this huge view screen. The men were kind of standing in a row watching the view screen, as was she. And she saw the stars racing by as they sort of flew through space, flew through the galaxy. She says it was like having a tour of the galaxy. And it was just very, very beautiful. And it was a glorious feeling, she says. And she felt like she finally had come home. She'd finally come home to where she belonged. She was with her people. She loved it. It was awesome. And she didn't want it to end. But after this, the experience did end, and she woke up back in bed feeling absolutely fantastic. She felt great. She felt like she had almost had a sort of experience involving enlightenment and felt like she was vibrating at a very high frequency. So this was a very wonderful experience, and following this, she did notice a very interesting change. While she would be giving her healing massages at work, this blue light would sort of come out of her hands, and she saw it. Other people saw it as well. And whenever this light came out, she got a very vivid picture in her mind's eye of the Greys on board the ship, and they were adjusting dials and switches. And they told her that they wanted to help her heal the people she was working with. So that's another really interesting healing aspect to her encounters. And this totally changed Pat's viewpoint about her experiences, and she started to research UFOs and this subject. She heard that there might be an underground UFO base at the Four Corners area in the United States. And she called up her friend Denise and asked her if she wanted to take a road trip and go visit Four Corners and see if they could get any information about this alleged ET base. And Denise said, yes, let's go. And so, sure enough, they took this road trip and went to the Four Corners area. And they were approaching this exact area and were driving right alongside a Native American reservation when this UFO appears and starts pacing their car. It's not too far away, it's just above treetop level. It's very bright, it's got little bright lights all around it and another panel of lights. It looks very strange. It's obviously not a plane or a helicopter or a shooting star or fireball or a balloon or anything conventional. It's pacing their car pretty closely. One odd thing was they did pass other cars in both directions, and nobody else seemed to notice it. That was very strange. Like, why can't they see this? Because it was very obvious to them, very close up, and it looked very strange. And it paced them for a good couple of hours until at one point it came close and they started to feel this very intense heat. The entire interior of the car started to heat up, and it got hotter and hotter to the point where they both became alarmed. And Pat said, I'm getting afraid, I'm starting to get afraid. At which point this object veered off and paced their car for another 15 minutes or so, and finally just darted off. So that was a very weird experience. And following this, they decided that was all they needed. They turned around and began their return journey. So more weird stuff happened after this. Here's a very weird experience that happened to Pat. She was again alone in her condo in her bedroom and woke up, and a good friend of her appeared in the condo as kind of like an apparition, but a very solid looking one. Her friend appears in her room and says, I'm going to introduce you to your higher self. At that point, something very strange says, as Pat says, a little gray came around the corner. And Pat was mystified and confused and a little alarmed and thought to herself, what? This is my higher self, a gray alien? And she actually asked this, and her friend said, yes. Pat got up and hugged the gray, and that was really the extent of the experience. She doesn't know what to make of it and felt like there might be some deception here. She's not convinced that her higher self is a gray alien and wonders if this was some sort of a disguise or some sort of manipulation. So she really wondered what was going on. While her experiences were positive, increasingly so, there was also an element of fear and confusion. And she really felt like there's an element of violation as well. And she wonders if she gave any type of agreement to allow this to happen, because she has no conscious memory of doing so. And she also began to wonder how long she's been having these experiences, because she remembered the male gray alien saying on her first abduction, boy, she's different tonight. And that stuck in her mind, and she wondered, has this happened before? So she really started to examine her past, looking for any clues that she may have had encounters. And having educated herself somewhat about the UFO phenomena, she did find some weird things that she thinks might be related. She remembered once when she was a younger woman, she went to the doctor. She wasn't feeling well. She was having some nausea. And she went to the doctor, and the doctor took some tests, and told her, oh, well, the reason you're feeling this way is because you're pregnant. Pat was absolutely shocked. She had not been intimate with everyone. This was flatly impossible. There was no possible way she could have been pregnant. And the tests, however, showed that she was. And she was pretty upset about it. She already had a daughter. There was no way she was going to have another child at her age. And as much as it upset her to make this decision, she decided she was going to terminate the pregnancy. She could not have this child. And the night before she was going to have this procedure, she woke up and she was bleeding severely. She called the doctor, and the doctor said, okay, you probably spontaneously aborted. I want you to be very careful and look for any tissue that you might pass. Pat did not pass any tissue. All it was blood. She did not see any tissue whatsoever. And so that upset her. And at the time, she didn't know what to make of it. But now, looking back, she wonders if perhaps the ETs came and took her baby before she could abort it. Because as she found out, missing pregnancies is definitely a feature in these encounters, as well as unexplained pregnancies, which was certainly true in her case. There was just no way she could have been pregnant. So that is interesting to say the least. And when she found out that many abductees carry unexplained scars, she examined her body, and sure enough, on her leg was an unexplained scar. And she has no idea how it got there. And that also concerned her. She wondered if perhaps she had been implanted. So another thing that came to her mind was early experiences in which she would wake up feeling paralyzed and there would be these little figures running around. She thought perhaps these were waking nightmares or something, but now she recognized them as typical grays. This was something she had suppressed and very deeply. And after she started meditating and examining her past, these memories started to surface. So she realized that this has been going on for quite some time. And intuitively, she does feel like she probably gave permission for these experiences to happen, but at the same time, she still feels a violation, like they have no right to do this to her and scare the living daylights out of her. Uh, Thankfully, she had gotten past all the fear, but initially, yeah, it was very scary. And she still had a lot of questions about what was going on with her. So when she had the opportunity to go see a psychic channeler, she signed up and went to this meeting to meet a lady who channeled spirits and ETs. So as she's in the audience, people started asking all kinds of questions about the ETs and their ships and how they travel through space. And finally, Pat got a hold of the microphone and she asked her question. She asked, is it true that we make an agreement to come here and that our bodies can be used in this way? At this point, the channeler lowered her head, was silent for a few moments, and then lifted her head and obviously was channeling some different type of spirit or ET. And as the channeler said, we are here, we are Zeta Reticuli, and said it in a very robotic, unemotional voice, and told Pat that yes, you did agree to have these experiences. Pat was not pleased with the answer, and she felt a wave of anger. And she asked another question, and she said, if you become consciously aware of your abduction, can you make them stop? And the ET said, no, you cannot make them stop, but if you become consciously aware, you will be handled in a different way. You need to understand why you created this. We perceive we are supporting you in your drama. Why did you create this? Again, Pat was not pleased with this answer. She felt a wave of anger. She felt like this ET was just shoving this all back at her and trying to make it her responsibility, when she felt that no, it was the ETs who were the ones who were abducting her. It was their fault. So the microphone went around to other people in the audience who were asking all these questions. And one lady asked, "You get so much from us. You come here and get specimens. You take things from our bodies. What do we get from you?" And the ET replied, "You get a jump start in your growth. That's what we give to you." And other people in the audience started asking about emotions, because the Greys, particularly the Zeta Reticula, are often known for not being very emotional. And the Grey said, or the Zeta Reticula ET said, "Our emotions are different than yours, but we do have emotions because we accept them as important to us." At this point, one of the people in the audience started talking about love and universal love, and Pat became very angry and thought to herself, they come here and stick metal rods up people's asses, and she's asking about love? So she's very eager to get the microphone and ask more questions, and she did. And she angrily asked them about this and told them that they have no right to take people. And the Zeta Reticula Gray alien seemed confused by this statement and said, "Why do we experience resistance from you? We are curious. We don't understand that." And Pat said, "Why? Why? Because you come and take me on your ship against my will." Pat did not want to, work out her issues in front of an audience. She didn't want people to know that she was being abducted. But this just slipped out. And the Gray replied unemotionally and said, "The growth and the experiences that you are receiving from this far outweigh the other things that you are experiencing. There is not one person in this room that would not willingly trade places with you." Again, Pat felt a little bit put off by this answer, and a few more people were able to ask questions, but at this point the session ended. So Pat came away from all of that somewhat dissatisfied and still feels like she is being violated and that the Greys had no right to take her against her will. A couple of weeks later, she was able to contact the channeler and asked her about this session. And the channeler told her, "Oh, you were the one who asked that question," because she had just started channeling the Gray ETs just a few weeks earlier and had never been out that long before. So that was kind of interesting. Meanwhile, Pat's experiences continued. In 1994, the Greys came again and took her. She had a period of missing time. She still feels violated and is unsure about this so-called soul agreement that she made. And when the Greys do appear in her bedroom, she still finds that somewhat scary. As she says, "It's something that I come home to and I have to deal with. I still sleep with the lights on. I have night lights all over my house, and the hall light is on every night. There's still an element of fear. It's not what's coming through the front door, it's what's coming through the wall." So Pat, while she is still got some fear involved with all this, feels like she has become spiritually transformed and that the ETs have taught her an enormous amount of information about herself. So that is a good aspect to this. As Pat says, "The way I see life is completely different. I'm not the same person. I'm a completely different person." Pat confronted her experiences head on. She wanted to know everything that was going on with her, which I think is the best way to deal with these experiences if you have the strength and you're willing to do it. And Pat decided she was going to seek out hypnosis. And she found a researcher by the name of Barbara Lamb, who was very well known in the Southern California area for performing hypnotic regressions on experiencers. And Pat went under hypnosis, and each time she did, it was pretty much the same thing. What she recalled was being physically examined, and the examinations weren't particularly pleasant. She always felt quite a bit of fear associated with them. So perhaps that's the reason why they were buried under hypnosis. Hard to say, but after a number of sessions where that's all that came up, she stopped the hypnotic sessions because there was nothing new. That's where she's sort of at this point. She still feels violated, but I asked her about this, and she said that she does not believe these Greys are evil or demonic or anything like that. She feels that they are trying to help her, but that they don't quite understand how much they scare her at times. Given the choice, she says she would continue to have encounters, but again, feels like the ETs don't quite understand emotions or people, which is pretty much exactly what they said. So what's interesting about Pat's case is she actually asked for an encounter and got it. What I find also interesting is her experiences began as very fearful, I mean terrifying. And as she confronted her experiences and learned more about them and confronted them head on, she was able to reduce her fear very much, and her encounters became completely transformed and were, in fact, very, very spiritual. And she learned all kinds of spiritual information. And that is a pattern I see in many cases. Another very interesting aspect of her case is that she has had healing encounters. She felt the soothing yellow light. She had that ball of light given to her, which was also very nurturing, very soothing. She enjoyed the purple rays of light. And all of this shows that there is a very strong spiritual and healing aspect to all of these encounters. Like many experiencers, Pat discovered she was leading a sort of a secret life, a hidden life. She had no idea she was having encounters growing up, but found out that, yeah, she was having encounters her whole life, but she had denied them, suppressed them, and explained them away. But finally, after visiting this channeler and having fully conscious experiences, that's when she woke up to the fact that this had been going on her whole life. Another interesting aspect of Pat's experiences is her mysterious pregnancy. She became pregnant under circumstances that were impossible. I mean, there was no way she could have become pregnant. She hadn't been intimate with anyone, and yet she was. And she also lost the pregnancy. And this is definitely a pattern we see in many cases involving female experiencers. Many of them do later meet their hybrid children. Pat hasn't yet had this experience, at least not at the time of the interview I did with her, which was some years ago. So maybe she has, but I don't know if she has. At any rate, I told Pat's story in my book, Extraterrestrial Visitations. So if you'd like to learn more about it, you can read about it in that book. And I felt it was important to share her case because it shows many of the details I hear in other encounters, shows how strange UFO encounters can be, and it shows how they can transform from something very fearful, very scary, to something that's healing and very spiritual. And that's why I wanted to do this video. I hope you've enjoyed it. Thanks once again for watching. I really appreciate it. And until next time, keep having fun.